大家晚上好，欢迎大家来到国际培训大咖五十谈，我是顾立民。上一期我们非常荣幸的请到了国际著名的超级导师制体系的建立者 Margot Murray 马果穆雷女士。穆雷女士非常的资深，而且呢，在国际的导师绩效改进界以及导师制界非常的有名，管理界也非常的知名。他创造的超级导师制为众多国家的众多的企业培养了大批的人才。那么在上期的访谈当中呢，我们询问了他很多关于超级导师制的问题，包括他是如何工作的超级导师制的工作流程是什么样子的，与我们平常说的教练有什么样的区别，以及超级导师制跟我们现有的企业里现存的学习发展体系又是什么样的关系，等等等等。穆雷女士非常资深，在行业里面已经有将近半个世纪的从业经验。在1986年到1987年，她就担任了国际绩效改进协会 IHPI 的主席，所以在这个行业里面非常的资深，也非常的知名。我们祝她一切都好，而且希望未来能够有机会向她继续学习超级导师制。Thank you, Margot。本周我们又一次非常荣幸的请到了另外一位重量级的嘉宾，他曾经担任明尼苏达大学教学设计及技术系的系主任。他的很多的学生、博士生或者硕士生在各个行业里面都非常的有成就那么他的名字呢叫做 Dr. Greg Sales， 他是我的老朋友，我们认识了将近有25年的时间。他是教学系统设计及电子化学习设计方面的专家，他其实同时也是一位企业家。他的公司硕德公司呢，在电子化学习设计界非常的知名。那么现在呢，他已经退休了。那么在电子化学习领域，他创造了很多的成就，也积累了非常丰富的经验。那么今天晚上，我们将就教学系统的设计的基本定义，以及教学系统设计的模型方面的一些基础问题向他请教，同时向他请教教学系统设计培训与绩效结果之间有什么样的关系，并请他给我们举一些例子。另外，我们特别要隆重的非常重点的向他请教电子化学习课程的设计电子化课程的设计的流程这个规矩的流程是什么样子的。而且呢，由于微课在我们国家非常的流行，那么我们也要请教他，微课到底是不是课？我们微课教的什么样的课程才算是真正的是知识，而不只是信息的呈现等等。所以我们闲话少叙，下面我们就隆重的请出 Dr. Greg Sales 塞尔斯博士。Hi, Greg. How are you?
I'm good. Nice to see you, George.
Nice to see you. Nice to hear you. Long time no see.
Yes, it has been.
Well, we have known each other for 20, my count is 23, 24 years now.
Sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, the first time I remember I met you was at an ISPI meeting at Minnesota chapter. You were giving us a presentation. We were all there. I was there like a little student and sitting in the front row, and you came in, took your coat off, and then started to talk about e-learning for an hour nonstop. So that's what my
it's
first
a topic
impression.
I was deeply immersed in, so I'm sure I could talk for a lot longer than that.
You bet. Well, but every meeting was monthly meeting of the Minnesota chapter was limited. That was actually one of my earliest Minnesota chapter meetings that I attended back in 1997 or 1998. So quite a long time ago. But I'm glad that we have become friends and kept in touch along these nearly quarter century now. But for our audiences, they probably don't know you. And first of all, for our audience, would you please introduce yourself a little bit and tell us where you grew up, where you went to college, what you studied, and tell us where you live or work now?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
You bet.
Well, I'm an American. I grew up in the state of Ohio till I was about 17. Then I moved to Alaska. I left home, moved to Alaska, and I lived in Alaska then till I was about 30. And in Alaska, I went to the University of Alaska for my first degree, which was in education. And I taught in some remote villages, in one-room schools in Alaska. Along the way, I picked up a master's degree from Miami University in Ohio, and that was in mathematics education. And I taught for a couple more years and decided I really wanted to learn more about how instruction was created, how it was put together, how to make it effective. So I looked around and found a really good program at the University of Minnesota, and I went there for my PhD. Got my doctorate in 1985, and then taught at the University of Cincinnati briefly, came back and taught at the University of Minnesota for a little more than a decade. And then from after working at the University of Minnesota, I was the chair of the Instructional Design and Technology program. And I got a lot of consulting work because companies were just in the late 80s, early 90s, moving into the use of e-learning, online learning. And I got so much consulting work that I started a company. And after a few years, the company was so successful that I left the university and worked in the company for 25 years. After which I thought, well, I'm old, I'll retire. I've had a good run. But that was in 2015. And I found out that being at home as a retired person didn't work so well for me. I went back to the university for several years, University of Minnesota, and worked in an international program there where I trained faculty at universities in 14 different countries on instructional design and technology. And then I retired from that and have been doing international development consulting. So working in developing countries, helping them with education and training and focusing on instructional design and technology again.
Greg, so far, how many countries have you worked with? I mean, agents, consulting clients covers how many countries?
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but I think around 45, maybe 46 or 7. But lots of countries all over Asia, Africa, Europe, not too much in South America, a couple, but not much. A lot of the island nations in the Pacific, I've worked with them. So quite a few places.
Great. And you were the chair of the Instructional Design Technology Department for how many years?
I think 5 years.
5 years?
Yeah.
It was a strong program too, right?
It was a very strong program. It was, I was there in the late 80s, early 90s, which was really sort of the peak of the instructional design and technology growth spurt in the US. That's when this field was just kind of at its pinnacle.
So between which year you were the chair of the department?
I think from 90 to 95.
Okay, 90 to 95. Yep, exactly. Those are the years that a lot of, that's the year of the transformation into the millennium. And at that time, if I'm correct, the personal PC just flourished suddenly, and then in the late 80s and the early 90s in the field of instructional design and also in performance technology, it also flourished. Like Mark Rosenberg, and he made a huge contribution to those, and those areas. And so that was a very strong program at that time, even stronger than St. Cloud State.
Yes, yes.
That's a joke.
Well, yeah, well, yes, I know you're an alum from St. Cloud State, but St. Cloud State had some really good people.
Right.
But I think the University of Minnesota, because it's what we call a tier 1 university, it's a research university. They were better known because they were, I guess we were, writing articles, publishing books, presenting at conferences at a much higher level than the folks at St. Cloud State and other universities.
Okay. And I'm going to keep this this part on the show. So, but if you ask Dennis, Dr. Dennis and John Burdings, and they probably have a different view.
Well, I don't know. I think they would acknowledge it too. Although, like I said, St. Cloud State had some really good people, and Dennis Fields was one of them. So yeah.
Right. And last year I met with Ross Tsai, if you remember.
Sure,
We were
I remember
Nankai
Ross. She was
alumni.
one of my doctoral students.
Right. One of your doctoral students, and she's doing very well. Professionally, she is moving up in the corporate letters, and so she also mentioned that University of Minnesota was a very strong program at that time, and she was so lucky to have you as her advisor at that time. The company Seward is an e-learning company. Which year exactly was it formed?
Yeah. Seward Incorporated was originally formed in 1990. It was under a different name. It was called Designs for Learning then. Right. But I was still at the university as a faculty person, but my consulting had grown to the point where I couldn't do all that work by myself. So I started a small company, had an office just off campus, hired some graduate students, and that's how the company started.
Great. And well, you are the chair of the Instructional System Design Technology Department, professor, chair, and also you have advised so many doctoral students and under your rings, and you're the expert of the field. So my first question to you, we have seen so many instructional design models. We have come to know, ADDIE model, the Dick and Carey model. As a matter of fact, I did interview Dr. Bob Branson. He's the contributor, major establishment creator of ADDIC model, and then later on became ADDIE model. So there's so many models, and which one do you think is the most efficient, or is your most favorite, counting on all the measurements or standards and criteria?
Sure. Well, I think all the models are derivatives. They come from the work that Robert Gagne did back in the 40s and 50s. And the ADDIE model became very popular, but I found it a little abbreviated. And being an academic, one of the things we do is we always create our own. So I created my own model, which incorporates a lot of the elements of the ADDIE model, a lot of the work that was done by Robert Gagne and Richard Clark and folks like that. And so the model that I created, I just call it an ISD model. And I sent you a copy of it because I suspected it might come up. But it starts out with really identifying the need for the training, and then working through the whole process of establishing goals and doing your various analyses and writing objectives and creating your assessment and developing your training. And I really find that process of doing your goals and your objectives and your assessment early in the process before you create the instruction to be absolutely critical. If you create your instruction and then create your assessment, your instruction, the results will be much less satisfying. You'll have a lot lower effectiveness in your training, I think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I must say that I'm so grateful at my early years, and I was one of the interns at your company. That was in 1999, if I remember. So I'm so grateful that I had the experience at Seward doing my internship for 3 months, and that was very short as a training, but they gave me a very practical view of how a course is designed and how the flow, carries on the instruction, the flow of instruction, and how it ends and how it's delivered to the clients and how to assess. And also at the very beginning, how do we conduct the assessment, a needs assessment? How do we conduct that? I never remember that we had a 2-day seminar with teachers, the Midwest for the blind, for the hearing impaired people.
Oh, yes.
And they cannot, remember that project. If you, we got all the design documents, and that it was since then I had the design document in mind that to different. Until today, I teach instructional design a lot in China, and I tell my students saying to differentiate if you are an instructional designer or not is like an architect. The metaphor is that instructional designer is like an architect. We design, and then when is very valuable. So we do the most valuable work, and but at the very beginning, you have to come up with very sound gap analysis. We did the 2-day workshop, just work with those people, and then we did the sign language. We learned a little bit about that. So my question to you next: what is the best way in your decades of experience to conduct a business analysis to identify gaps before conducting a learning project?
That's a really good question, and it has about, I don't know, an infinite number of answers.
I know.
From my perspective, doing the gap analysis depends on the environment that the education or training is going to take place in. Sometimes, the gap is apparent. It's right in your face. You're a company and you're bringing in some new equipment that you need to train people on. It's right there in front of you that the gap is where the learners are right now and where they need to be to use this equipment. So the gap is very apparent. In other situations, like maybe you're trying to increase the effectiveness of a sales force.
Yep.
You've got people who are out there selling, and maybe they've been salespeople for a long time, but they aren't hitting their numbers the way you would like them to. They're not being as productive and generating the quantity of sales. So then you have to really figure out, well, what is it that's limiting their number of sales that they're bringing in? Is it that the product they're selling isn't any good? Is the price is too high? There's too many competitors around the market? Do they not know the information that they need to communicate to potential buyers how your product is better than a competitor's product? How, while your price might be a little higher, the product lasts longer, has fewer failures, is more efficient, produces at a higher level, whatever, depending on the kind of product you're selling. So you really have to look at it from a lot of different directions and figure out, well, what is the cause of the gap? Is the cause of the gap something new that has arrived? Is the cause of the gap that you're bringing in new employees who don't know the information? Is the cause of the gap that people who you currently have working aren't as knowledgeable about the task as they need to be? They have some knowledge, but not a lot of knowledge. So you really have to go at it from a lot of perspectives, and that involves talking about what is the perceived problem and trying to determine if that's the real problem or if there's some other problem that's really causing the deficiency that you see. And then it can go on to interviewing potential trainees, interviewing customers that have interacted with your organization or the products from your organization, the employees of your organization, to figure out what are the real issues. Sometimes it's lack of knowledge, sometimes it's lack of skill, sometimes it's lack of competence in communicating. So there are lots of different reasons, and you have to figure out, are the gaps that you're thinking you're seeing, are they the result of knowledge or skill deficiencies, or are they the result of something else like pricing or quality or competition or speed of delivery or something like that? Some things are
Right.
you can address through education and training. Other things you have to address through other kinds of business decisions, changes in your structure.
Right. Then that's performance improvement kicks in.
Exactly. Yep.
So a comprehensive needs assessment is very necessary before conducting kickstarting e-learning or learning project, and that has to be done by a very expertized instructional designer. So my next question to you is, you have incubated so many good students and instructional designers, and you have hired so many good instructional designers, very experienced. So in your view, what makes a good instructional designer, and what is the most key, if we want to keep one characteristic, most important element of being an instructional designer, what it is?
I don't think you can narrow it to one thing. From my perspective, a good instructional designer has to have a good model of instructional design that they follow closely. But they need more than that. They need good interpersonal skills, a strong work ethic, the ability to work alone as well as in groups. So those are all really important skills. But if you have a person who can work alone and in groups and interact well with customers and clients and so forth, but they don't have a good ISD model, then they're not going to create good instruction. They have to have a good foundation in instructional design and understand the process so that they can create a good product.
My experience is systematic thinking is it's a loaded question, when I ask this question. I have my own thinking. So do you think systematic thinking is the most important among so many qualities of an instructional designer?
Yes, I agree. And that ISD model to me is the touchstone that a good instructional designer keeps coming back to, and making sure they're not skipping any steps in that model. It's easy to eliminate steps from the process, but you have to understand, as you eliminate those steps, you reduce the quality of the product you're creating. Those steps are there for a reason, because they fulfill a critical component of the process. And as you take them out, you get less and less quality. It's kind of like building a car, but you don't put air conditioning in it, or a radio, or windows, or maybe you don't put a roof on it. It still may run down the road, but the experience of the riders is not going to be as good.
Still on the instructional design work, or when you have done so many, you have done projects among so many countries, 45 countries. That's quite a record. Do you think, have you found any differences in instructional system design processes and standards? Do you make adjustments in each and different country, or you just one model and then they apply to all the cultures?
I understand. Yeah, it's interesting. In some countries, I have encountered resistance to using an instructional design model, an instructional systems model. People want to move quickly. They want to get it done fast. They want, they brought you in because you're an expert, and they want you to get this done quickly.
Right.
The problem with that is they don't realize that your expertise is what you're applying here. You're using this model because it's critical to high quality results. Instead, they just want something really fast. And it's not, I don't think it's an economic issue, because sometimes some of the places I've worked, I was being paid by agencies that had lots of money. So, outside agencies to go in and help with problems in a country. So it wasn't like it was their money, but they still were in a hurry to get things going. And it's hard sometimes to explain that if you take the time up front, things will go more smoothly further down the road, and you'll get a better product. You'll have fewer issues that result from the training that you're delivering. And so that's probably the greatest problem. Other places, they openly accept the instructional systems approach that you're using and appreciate the care and detail that goes into the work. So it varies a little bit, but that's probably about it. And that may be individuals as well as cultural. I mean, it may be an individual difference as opposed to a cultural difference.
So in other words, local adaptations might be necessary, but it's not a must. But all the time you have been sticking to the instructional system design principles and guidelines.
Yeah, I think the adaptation is mainly how you communicate with the local client, making sure that they understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And some of them are just a little more impatient, I guess is the word I would use. Less willing to put in the time and effort up front. And I believe part of that is that they just haven't been exposed to this kind of an approach before, and they need to go through it a couple of times to really appreciate the quality that comes out of it, as opposed to just slapping something together quickly and disseminating it and then having problems with the results.
Great. Next question is about instructional design as a profession. As you just mentioned that the program at U of M, Minnesota, University of Minnesota, during your time probably was the peak. And I found that with a lot of universities that was true. So things have changed, time has changed. And what is your prospect of instructional design as a profession, not only in the United States, but in other countries, based on your knowledge?
Yeah. Again, this is a good question with lots of complicated twists and turns in the answer.
I know. I just want to hear your version of it.
Sure. Let me go back to the issue of why was the peak in the early 90s, mid 90s. Instructional design for many corporations was a new idea in the late 80s, early 90s. Only the largest corporations had instructional designers or an understanding of instructional design. But in the 90s, early 90s, technology became a really important method of delivering training. And a lot of mid and small companies, hospitals, universities, other organizations started to see that technology was going to be a training tool in the future. And they had no knowledge of technology, and they saw instructional design as linked with technology. And so instructional design and technology programs did really well during those early years when technology was being adopted and adapted for education and training. After the mid 90s, a number of tools became available, online tools in many cases, that people, trainers, typically within organizations, could become familiar with and create their own online learning. And that was seen as more economical by corporations. And so they stopped focusing on instructional design and instructional design methodologies as much. And they turned over a lot of training development to trainers. And trainers, in my opinion, have a different skill set.
Right.
And if trainers are trying to create training, they apply their skill set to the development of that training, and not an instructional design model, but a delivery model. And so you get a different quality of training. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, I believe a lot of corporations drifted away from using instructional design and going with internal development by trainers or people who used to be trainers but now call themselves instructional designers, but didn't really have an instructional design background. So they did that to keep some of the information, proprietary information, in-house, to do what they thought was going to create more economical training, a little easier for them to manage internally, and maybe in concern about having a competitive advantage and so forth. But from my point of view, it was a very bad decision, and training has suffered a lot as a result. The quality of training, the efficiency of training, and frankly, people's attitudes about technology as a training tool, because the quality of training people have been getting isn't always as robust as it should be, as effective as it should be. And as a result, they think, well, I spent money on this, and it's an online video basically, or it's a video with a multiple choice quiz at the end or something like that. And so the attitude toward instructional design and technology diminished in the areas, in the organizations that really relied on it. And as it lost its reputation, a little bit of the sparkle, the pizzazz of it as a new way of learning, the field suffered as a result. Did that answer your question a bit?
Yes. So in other words, instructional design will have to, in the future, from now is 2020. We can't believe it's 2020 already. But onward, the instructional designer, they have to prove their values in the organizations. Otherwise, the future is, going to be in question.
Yes. It is a matter of proving not just yourself, but your field. And back in the late 80s through the 90s, there were a number of initiatives that took place to try to certify instructional designers, to require that instructional designers met certain standards in order to be able to have the title of instructional designer. Kind of like an accountant has to be, you're a CPA, a certified public accountant.
I know. I just I want to say I remember Chauncey International did that from ETS.
Yeah.
What is one of the CTTs and all of that.
Yeah, and there were a number of efforts to do that, but none of them ever really caught on at a level that resulted in kind of a professional certification that people recognized nationally or internationally. And so each individual instructional designer has to work to differentiate themselves from trainers and people who are just creating training. And that's a challenge because it's done sort of at the individual level. There used to be some professional groups that really help to distinguish instructional designers and the value of instructional design, but those also have either gone away or become less influential, I think.
Right. I was on the board of IBS TPI for 2 terms for 6 years. Yeah. IBS TPI is the International Board of Standards for Training, Performance, and Instruction. We had the standards for instructional designers. We also had the meetings here in Shanghai at East China University in 2015. I remember. I hosted it. I mean, Dr. Huang Jian hosted here in East China University in Shanghai. And we introduced the instructional design competencies, also trainer competencies, and what else? The evaluators' competencies, and so on and so forth. So, Greg, I want to explore a little bit question. There are so many like the AHRD. I know they had one time they had some effort, but like Chauncey Group, like the IBS TPI, like, even the ECT. I believe, I don't have the hard evidence, but I believe they have some sort of a certification. Even large organizations, they have their own certifications. But what do you think is the major reason that none of them prevail until today?
Yeah. Well, part of it is that I think universities need to be certifiers. You need to, or governments need to certify you. If it's a private organization, a professional organization, something like that, people don't give it the same validity that you would see if it were from a sort of an independent arbiter, like a university or a government agency or something like that. In the United States, we have the US Department of Education. If they had an instructional design certification, that would add the credibility, the validity to the field that you would need. But if it's done by a professional organization made up of members who are trying to give themselves credibility, that just doesn't work. And if it's done by a commercial organization that's trying to sell certifications by giving assessments or whatever, then that doesn't work either. That's looked at as a profit motive rather than a improvement of professionalism motive. So I think universities and or government agencies would be the way to get certified, to give the certification value.
Mm-hmm. The reason Greg, the reason I'm asking is because maybe since in America and China are different, quite different. You know this. I mean,
Sure.
quite internationally. So maybe China still has a chance on the second wave. Probably
Oh,
there
of
is a
course.
second
Yeah. I
wave.
think even America has a chance. It just
We do.
is an issue of people in the right places need to see the value of that certification and the training and education that goes behind that certification.
Yeah.
It's not something you just go in and you pay your money and you get a certificate. You've got to demonstrate your competencies, your knowledge and your skill, your ability to deliver in an appropriate fashion, and then you get your certificate. So I think that's really the critical element, and it's got to have the right people in the right place drive the initiative.
Right. It's so sad that so far, well, China is always trying to catch on in many aspects in social development and all these areas. And in instructional design, and believe it or not, today in China there is, I would say, zero programs that train professional instructional designers for companies, for businesses. And that is the truth. And that still today was true 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and still true today. And that is a huge gaping hole that needs to be filled by somebody.
Well, I
So,
think then you're in a really good position to create an instructional design professional certification where universities determine what they believe a good instructional designer needs to be able to know and do, and then create a certification program as they create their training programs for instructional designers. So that, to me, you're in a really good spot. Here, we'd have to kind of retrofit a certification program into existing universities. And the problem there is you already have programs in these universities that have full curricula. Their courses are already established, their faculty is already hired. The things that take place in those schools are well established, and change is a very slow, difficult process at a university. Even just adding a new course at a university, making it an official course, can take a couple of years. So putting in a whole new program would be very difficult in an existing environment. But if you're creating a new program in a university that doesn't have one, you have all kinds of opportunities. So good luck.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, my head off that tonight just opened up a career for me.
Well, I think you'd be a good person to lead that effort.
Thank you. Thank you. I do think, well, you did offer you did point out the very good advantage that China has, even though we're like barehanded and we're barren lands and maiden lands to be cultivated, we still have the advantages. So, I mean, there are always advantages because we're probably standing on the shoulder of the giants, and then you get a higher starting point.
Well, we're all doing that, but even
Right.
here in the U.S., we're Robert Gagne to me was the giant in instructional design, and he built that foundation upon which all of us are continuing to build and grow. So.
Right, right. The other day when I interviewed Dr. Marcy Driscoll, she is Marcy Driscoll, you know her.
Sure.
She's used to be the dean of College of Education at Florida State.
Mm-hmm.
I actually interviewed 6 professors from FSU so
Well,
far.
that was and still is the #1 school for instructional design. So.
Right, right. One of the epic centers, and she had a very good strategy under her leadership. FSU flourished. Their graduate program, they changed the strategy, and also she made a lot of effort to make their names a big legendary names remembered, like Walter Dick, a professor of instructional design. Jim Klein, Dr. Jim Klein is the Walter Dick instructional design professor, something like that. And
Yeah.
also they have a room of they have a hall just dedicated for the big names.
Yeah, Keller was there for a while, and Gagne was there for a while, and all the biggies. Yep.
Right. Exactly. So far, I've interviewed Dr. Roger Kaufman, but unfortunately, he passed away about 1.5 months ago. Dr. Roger Kaufman, he's a good friend of mine, and very, very, very good. He's a figure. One of the big lights of the field, and also Dr. Robert Branson, Robert Reeser, Bob Reeser, and also Dr. John Keller, Jim Klein, Dr. Jim Klein, and Dr.
Yes.
Marcy Driscoll. So far, and so I'm trying to interview Dr. Walter Dick because he is the Mountain Everest for me.
Yes. Yeah.
I wanna. Yeah.
Well, the Dick and Carey book, that was sort of a staple in every instructional design program. It was kind of a core text. So yeah.
Yeah. It was my textbook when I was studying with Dennis.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for providing a different perspective. I do see that there is where there is a vacancy, there's always opportunity. There will always hope, and somebody needs to step up because instructional design, it is as needed in America. It is definitely needed in China because talent development is so crucial to the economic development in China, and China has opened up 41 years so far, and we have exhausted our resources of the first wave of development. So we have the population and the labor intensive and export and all of that, but the next stage will be looking at higher, more elevated model of development instead of just labor intensive and earning for reserves piling up. So that's kind of a down the road, and my next question is, that really leads to the next question. You have done so many consulting projects, big companies, Fortune 100s and Fortune 500s, and so many countries. So to your understanding, do you think there is a direct link between training and performance results? If so, can you give us an example?
Yeah, that question is another tricky one. You know, the
Sorry about that.
well, the best questions are tricky. That's a good interviewer to ask tricky questions, difficult, challenging questions. When you look at performance results or performance change, there are a lot of factors. I mean, it could be a training situation or an education situation. And to me, those are very different things. You know, one is training, you want somebody to be able to do very specific kinds of things. You teach them how to do something, and then that's what they do. In an education situation, you provide somebody with knowledge, and they determine how that knowledge is used to improve what their end result is. And so the education kind of enhances them as an intellectual individual, gives them the power to think about things in different ways. And then they use that knowledge to figure out how to change their performance. And then, you know, just because you're training them or you're educating them doesn't mean you're going to see a performance result. You know, the fact that they've learned something does not mean there's going to be a change in their behavior. They have to be motivated to implement what they've learned and decide to use that to improve performance. And so part of the education or training process is to include motivation and to include an understanding that by improving performance, they improve their own situation, and they also improve their employer's situation. Sometimes if people are trained on something or educated on something, they just choose not to use that new knowledge, or they don't use it as well as they should. And, you know, there are performance changes as a result of education and training, and you can see them everywhere you look, really. I mean, in public education, you know, students learn to read and write and do math and create projects and solve problems. In corporate situations, employees learn about new products that they're going to be selling, or new manufacturing processes, new packaging techniques, whatever the training is. And you always see that happening. And so the performance changes are really easy to see. Whether the performance changes in the ways and the degrees that were intended really goes back to what was the quality of the education or training that was designed, what were the motivations that were put in place to encourage people to use that, and how is that performance being monitored, and how are the learners being held accountable. So in one of my models that I worked on in the Quick Guide to E-Learning book, you know, the third phase of the process is support. And that support is supporting them through motivation, supporting them through accountability, supporting the technology to make sure that it stays current and is updated and modified as needed. So, you know, often that process is overlooked. You know, you've got your delivery process and your support process as part of this model. Often what happens is people, when they're doing instructional design, focus on the creation process. So they don't really get into looking at whether there's a performance change. They create a product, they release a product, and they move on to creating their next product. And they don't follow up with delivery and support. So.
Thank you. The reason it is a trick question, I must confess, because it is a mystery almost to many business people, especially in, learning development professionals who really wish to increase business results. And for years, who has been exploring, is there a direct link between those two, the performance results? Because business results are, you have multiple inputs and then you get one output. and
Right.
multiple inputs. One of them is learning, is employee capability, but you have like 90% others. All those 90% others, but how do you effectively link your effort, your learning development effort to the business results? You have to really figure out your interrelationship, what your relationship with the other 90, because you have like 10%. If learning and development is 10, the others are 90, and then you have to figure out what's your relationship. And then in conjunction, somehow there must be a theme, red line, or major theme carried through the whole business activity from the very beginning to the end, from the input to the output. And
Right.
there is a process. There must be one that need to be figured out. So that's my next effort, to figure it out, to make a breakthrough between business and learning. And
Yeah.
somehow we have figured out, but just not in the English literature yet. So we're yet to kind of, we find a way. We think we find a way, but it has to be proven effective.
Well, I know you interviewed John Keller, and we just talked about that, and I'm sure you talked about the ARCS model. And the last part of the ARCS model, the S at the end, is for satisfaction.
It is.
And part of the often overlooked elements of instructional design and delivery are that satisfaction element. The employees need to not only get trained and have attention, relevance, confidence, but they need that satisfaction. They need to, at the end of the product, or at the end of the process rather, they need to feel like what they've done was important, whether it's a patriotic sort of importance or it's a financial importance. They hit their goal, and so they got a bonus. Whatever the satisfaction is that can be built into that training. So I would say it goes beyond output to satisfaction. How are those employees being acknowledged or rewarded, so that when they're completed with this, they feel it was of value, and value to them internally, their internal motivation versus external motivation. They need to get balanced. So maybe you give them a small bonus, but maybe to the employee, that was just a small amount of money, and so it's kind of irrelevant. But if it's acknowledging them with praise or something else, they may feel like that is a better result. And so you need to have that after the output. You need to make sure that the workers feel like their efforts were rewarded, and that's going to prepare them for the next education or training process they have to go through, because they'll see that there's a value for them at the end, and that's going to be really critical.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So much for the ISD question. Next, let's move on to the e-learning. Thank you for the answer. And I really want to catch up with time, and also I want to mention the flow.
I have one of those too.
Can you grab your, do you have your English version, the original English version?
Yeah, I've got one here.
Great. Okay, can you hold up both from your end? Thank you. Here you go. Here you go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good. Good, good. I want to let our audience know that in 2003, Dr. Sales published a book called A Quick Guide to E-Learning, because he's been in e-learning field for so many years, and he had done so many consulting projects worldwide, not only in the United States, and then he wrote a book for executives. It's a very thin book. So in 2003, while I was still in the United States, I translated that book into Chinese and published by the CITIC publication. And that was in 2003. It was very early. Remember those times in 2001, 2002, LMS, learning platforms that just became very popular. And this book, the introduction of this book, was very timely, but didn't draw the attention of the business people because everybody was trying to get things done quickly. But now we have learned, to my experiences, we have learned the lesson from not doing things the way it should be. Because right now, well, Greg, I'll just give you a little bit history of the e-learning in China in 2000. Learning platforms suddenly became very popular, very, very popular. And then later on, just carry on 2005, and later on, the platforms became very, very popular and big, the sum total, all that big companies, and then a lot of companies bought those LMSs, but don't have profound or sound courses content on the platform. So people lost confidence. And then just a couple of years ago, suddenly overnight, the micro learning became very popular too. So micro courses suddenly became very, very popular overnight throughout China. Most of the everybody knows, because everybody's trying to get things done quick. And that's in contradiction to the sound, profound process of instructional system design. So, and that really leads our question. So what do you think? I see there's a contradiction. Do you see that is a contradiction there? I mean, fast and fury e-learning course, micro courses, and versus
Yeah,
sound instructional design.
yeah. Well, you see a difference in these two, and I see a difference in these two, but that's because we come from a very educated instructional design perspective. Most of your people in a corporate setting would not see a difference. And that's because they look at any communication related to work, work improvement as education, instructional design, or an instructional product. And often what you're looking at really is information dissemination. It's just information. When that information was created, there was no goal to what that learner would get from this and how it would maybe change their performance. There were no objectives that needed to be met. There was no assessment that was created, or if it was a very weak assessment that was unrelated to necessarily a performance change.
Right.
So it's really information dissemination, which on the continuum, it's way out here somewhere, far, far away. Information dissemination. That's like reading an article in the newspaper and saying, oh, maybe I could use that on my job somehow. Well, maybe you could, maybe you couldn't, maybe it's relevant, maybe it isn't, maybe it's what your boss wants, maybe not. So it's a very different thing than a product that has been designed to create specific knowledge gains, behavior changes, competency development, and so on. And usually there's no assessment or no follow-up to the delivery of it, no support, no maintenance of it over time as conditions change, as learners change, as needs change. So often those micro things, I go to YouTube a lot to learn how to do some small task around the house. I watch somebody do it, and then I go do it myself. They've modeled something, and then I go implement it. But if I want to do it next time, I have to go back to that video because I didn't learn it. I just looked at it, had it in my short-term memory, quick ran over, did what the task was, and I'm finished. That's a very different kind of thing than a well-designed piece of instruction that's intended to result in learning and behavior change.
Thank you, because we are surprisingly or not surprisingly, we have exactly the same view. I always said that is not e-learning, that is e-information software package.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes they just record a PPT using a PPT recording, or how to do this, or even a short video. I told them, even just for God's sake, just for all kinds' sake, just give me one interactivity, only one. I don't ask for more. For that 8 minutes, something software, just give me one interactivity, and then I can consider you a learning course, because you have at least meet the minimal standards to converting one term. You give the opportunity of the learner to converting from short-term memory to long-term memory. You have the encoding process. You have the encoding effort there, and you give that effort to the learner for them to do themselves. That's the beauty of e-learning. They can do it multiple times, anytime they want. So if you don't have that interactivity, I cannot call you or qualify you as e-learning. That's e-information software package.
Right. We, at Seward Incorporated, we were often asked to create packages that were basically certification packages that just certified that someone had been exposed to this content. It was usually on some topic that was mandated by the government that all employees needed to know about, sexual harassment in the workplace, or
compliance sometimes.
Yeah, or health issues, or health information privacy, things like that. We often did that for hospitals, and they just wanted people to read through it, maybe hear a audio, see a video, maybe click a button, but mainly at the end, when they reached the end of it, a report was sent to the HR department saying they had completed it. It didn't say they learned anything, they knew anything, they would do anything differently. It just said they'd been through it. And that to me is just information dissemination. And sometimes it's done with technology, but it isn't what you would consider online learning or e-learning of any sort.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you for clearing the name again and verifying, give us another, your perspective, actually the correct, I would say correct perspective. I'm so glad we're hitting on the e-learning, because my next question is, what is the standard e-learning production cycle to you?
Well, it's in the book here.
Yeah, I know.
Can I hold this up so people can see this model a little bit here?
Yes.
So this model is the model that I look at for the, thank you. It's the model I look at for the e-learning process. And there's a creation phase where you're producing your e-learning. That's your instructional design effort, your analysis and design and development. That's where most internal training organizations focus their effort and their investment. And when they hire external consultants like, Seward Incorporated or other companies, they would get that kind of that's where they would focus their money. But then you've got the all-important delivery. And if you don't focus on that delivery, knowing how you're going to roll it out, to whom you're going to roll it out, how they're going to know it's coming, where you're going to support their efforts in terms of providing them time for training, that sort of thing. And then the support that follows on after delivery, you need to make sure that they're getting the product is being updated and revised, and that revisions, for example, may happen if a different type of employee starts coming in, somebody who already knows something that is in the training, or perhaps doesn't know as much as the last group. Maybe you started by training internal employees and they already had a certain basis of knowledge. Now you're bringing in new hires and they don't have that knowledge. So you may need to adjust the training so that it starts at an earlier point and builds that background knowledge. And also you need to recognize that sometimes the technology is going to change. It used to be delivered on a computer, then it was on a tablet, now it's on a phone. Next thing, it might be delivered on your wristwatch or through an implant or something. So you have to figure out how is the training going to get delivered, and how does what you've got need to be modified to work in that new environment. And then also sometimes training is just no longer necessary. The new hires already know that stuff. Maybe the equipment you were training them on has been modified or replaced. And so it's better to just retire that training and go to a whole new method of training them, either a new online learning method or perhaps some other methods.
Yeah, I'm going to insert the production cycle there, the life cycle into the interview. Well, I'm asking the e-learning questions is a very basic questions for our audiences, because a lot of them are in the process of developing some online courses, especially with the pandemic. Suddenly, Greg, in the beginning of the year when the pandemic came, everybody went online. All the training, learning, coaching, whatever, online, period. You do it from a distance. And true all worldwide, including education field. And so e-learning is suddenly become hot again, a hot topic become popular again, but to avoid the garbage in, garbage out phenomenon, and also to avoid page turner phenomenon, we got to have a good e-learning development team. So what roles and responsibilities what is the ideal e-learning development team composed of?
Sure. Well, e-learning today, almost by necessity, has to have a high production value. It has to engage the learners visually, auditorially, content-wise. Learners these days are used to being entertained, not just educated. And if they're looking at something that looks like it was put together by a 12-year-old, they're not going to focus on it. So you need to have professionals involved. You need to have technology professionals, development people, experts in whatever delivery system or platform you're using. You need to have probably video production people involved so that you get a proper lighting and audio and quality of whatever you're shooting. You need to have writers and editors. If something has a lot of errors in it, like in the writing or in the layout on the page, that is a very discouraging thing for a learner. If they look at it and they see those mistakes, they say, the quality here is so bad, how can I trust the content? And so they disengage from the learning. And you need to have, of course, instructional designers who are going to do all the upfront work that these other production people will then build out later on. Your instructional designer has to do your analyses up front, determine your learners and your learning environment, and figure out your goals and objectives, write your assessment. And then the content has to be built to that assessment by the production people, the writers, editors, videographers, programmers, and so forth. And then you need quality assurance testing on it. You need to have enough people go through it to make sure that it will function properly no matter what the user is doing. Because users have a tendency to just click around on the screen. And if they click somewhere and go off into cyberspace somewhere, that again is going to be very frustrating and annoying and reduce their confidence in what they're learning. So that quality assurance at the end is going to be really critical.
So there are multiple roles, not only instructional designers, but writers, editors, multimedia developers, and testers, and IT programmers, and everybody involved.
Yeah. One of the big problems I see with most in-house production is it's done by a very limited team, usually a trainer and a technology person. And the technology person makes it run like a technology person would want to see it. And the trainer makes it run, puts content in it that they would do if they were doing training. So a lot of it will be audio or video, and it'll be done in a format that is more of a presentation than a training
Right.
or an education package. So I think you really need that instructional designer, and you need to be driven, the whole process needs to be driven by the outcomes you want to achieve. And then the assessment needs to make sure that that the assessment assesses the learner's ability to do the things that are identified as your outcomes, your objectives. And so you need a bigger team than just two people.
Right. And not agreed, but not all of the companies, they can afford a big team of e-learning design. I think that's one of the reasons why microlearning is suddenly became so popular, because all the time we presented as e-learning, you have to have sound instructional design, development, and then programming, production cycle, and testing, and delivery, and support, and maintenance, all of that assessment. So is a life cycle. Too much.
Yeah.
My boss asked me to present something next week, and I need to get it done. So I have this micro learning, boom, and I got it done. I got my praise from my boss, and so who cares? I got my job done. That's why they got so popular suddenly.
Yeah. The question is your boss going to be happy down the road with what people have learned from that training? And in a lot of my writings, I talk about this triangle: good, fast, and cheap.
Oh yeah.
You can pick two of those things, but you can't have all three.
Right.
If you want it to be good and fast, it's not going to be cheap. If you want it to be cheap and fast, it's not going to be good. So you have to figure out which two of those are the most important for you. And that's how you proceed with your instructional design and your e-learning development. If you want good results, it's either going to take some time or it's going to cost some money, and you can't have it the other way around.
Exactly. That's why it is so hard to balance the cost of maintaining. I mean, not a lot of executives, they see the investment will deserve it in the long run.
Mhm.
At US West, we did the right thing to do that back those years, and I mean, e-learning production is costly sometimes, but it's good, and then over a long run, it becomes cheap
Mhm.
because more users, because investment is one-time investment, and over time it's just have very minimum cost to maintain it. But over time, if this course is being learned and used and again by generations and generations of employees over 10 years of time, is very worthwhile doing it.
Sure. And that's an excellent point. E-learning is not the solution to every education or training challenge you have. If you've got 20 salespeople that you're trying to train, e-learning may not be the tool to use. If you've got 400, then it might be more efficient, because you don't have to bring them into a training site, take them out of the field. They can do it in the evenings in their hotel or whatever. And so the number of people that you're training is a key factor as to what sort of investment you're going to put into it, and what tools you might use for delivery.
I think your point, good, fast, and cheap. That's a really good reminder to all of our learning professionals in front of the camera to think about what value does micro course bring to you?
Yeah.
Because those are not courses. That's not learning. That's only e-learning dissemination. As I always said, I always voiced, and Dr. Sales just said to all of us again, that's not learning. That's information dissemination. So in order to really create value for learning, we need to get things done the way it should be. The way it should be, don't pay the price again. So I think that's the message Dr. Sales will give us too. I put his words into my mouth, but I'm just having all that, knowing Dr. Sales for so many years, I think he will give us that warning too, because a lot of companies gone through that cycle, and that price is costly, very costly, especially over long run, because not only lose short-term financial gains, but you lose confidence from the people,
Yes.
of the people. And then that is financial gain, you can get it back somehow. But when you lose confidence from one person once, it is very, very, very hard to gain the reputation or credibility back again. You may need much longer time, multiple times of efforts. We all know that in our life, from our life experiences, and true in the business world. So thank you, Greg, for giving us that warning. I said it for you, but
You're welcome. I
And
thought you restated it accurately. That was good.
thank you. Well, e-learning is so important. Do you think it will dominate enterprise learning in the future? If so, to what? I mean, you just said e-learning is not everything. It's not the only solution to all the development capability management issues at an organization. So here you go.
Yeah, I think it depends on the enterprise. Some environments, some organizations are too small to make quality e-learning a practical solution. Some organizations don't have content that lends itself well to an e-learning delivery. If your education or training requires a lot of hands-on experience in a laboratory or in a manufacturing floor, or something like that, e-learning may be part of the solution, but it won't be all of the solution. You have to have other methods of delivery, of training. So I think e-learning as a component of an enterprise solution is very probable for especially medium and large size organizations. But I would certainly not think of it as my only method of providing education or training to employees.
Right now, we are there's a new word, there's a VUCA, V-U-C-A, volatile, uncertainty, ambiguity, everything's changing.
Yes.
So V is called shortened as a VUCA. So everything's changing. And it is such a popular word in China because it fits into our profile and our current status now, and everything, everybody's on the run like 24/7. And
Yes, I understand.
Yeah, that's a typical developing economy does. So good. My question is there a balance between a tipping point or a balance point between good sound instructionally sound courses and cheap, fast, and good? You know what I mean?
Well, life is about balance. You've got to find that equilibrium. You can't focus so much on getting the perfect training developed that it never gets delivered. So there is a balance there. But part of that balance is driven by how important are the outcomes. There's a question about how much you will lose if the training isn't good. What is the risk of having bad training or inadequate training? Is it going to result in equipment failures, product losses? Is it going to result in diminished sales? Is it going to result in errors that result in injury to workers or to clients or customers? So, the higher that loss ratio is, the more important the quality of the training is. If the training is on something where you have very minimal risk, if the training is not extremely high quality, then you can focus less on the production of the training. And as that loss ratio increases, then you need to invest more in the quality of the training. If
Yeah.
you're teaching, for example, if you're teaching, as we've done, teaching physicians how to implant heart valves in patients, you
Hmm.
don't want them to make a mistake. So that training has to be really high quality. On the
Hmm.
other hand, if you're teaching them how to, um, you know, sanitize a work surface,
Hmm.
the risk is a lot smaller there.
Oh yeah.
So you have to really think about what are you going to lose if you do it wrong.
Right. Right. Exactly. It's just a kind of an anecdote story that when I was in 2008, IBM, I was interviewing with IBM, and they want a country role for learning and development. So I was interviewing with the Greater China CEO, and he asked me a question: George, can you prove me the value of training? I didn't have the answer, and
Mhm.
but in times of danger, our brain works faster. So I said, so I asked a question back. I said, Tom, can we afford not to train? And he said,
Good answer.
yeah, you're right. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's the same thing. I mean, it's just kind of on the side, but it is my I remembered it, and so that is a question: how to prove the value. And earlier you mentioned we talk about the standards and the process of ISD, the standards and education, Department of Education depends on who does it, and so on and so forth. And I think that the key word is value. And you did say that we have to prove the value of instructional designers in order to standardize it and then give out certification, because that certification gains means credibility, or means benefits, and then you can get recognition or reputation and credibility. I think that is the same thing. It's the same thing as in e-learning, that it is always about balance. How do you balance these three factors: and good, fast, and cheap? If you can balance it and prove it worthwhile, and then your e-learning program is going to be a winner in the organization.
I agree. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, on the, I also want to get your view on another side question is, back to the instructional design. When I teach instructional designers and instructional design classes, I always said one word, one sentence: I'm an instructional designer. I can design any course, any training. Um, your reflection on it, please.
Um, Instructional designers work with subject matter experts. So I would say if you've got the right subject matter expert, you can design training on any topic. One of the challenges is getting a subject matter expert who has the patience to work with an instructional designer. Often subject matter experts are busy people, they're qualified, competent professionals. And the idea of going through the interview process and working with an instructional designer is not something they are eager to engage in. But I do think a good instructional designer with the right support team, the subject matter experts as well as the developer folks we talked about before, you can design for pretty much any education or training challenge, regardless of the topic.
As you can see, I've been holding up my joy, because because when you said the subject matter expert, SMEs, and that's the way I've been always teaching, that working with SMEs, we're process experts, not content experts.
Exactly.
We rely on those content experts to work with us, so we can design any training, and that's I always been teaching. So as a matter of fact, I remember I learned this from Dennis, from you, and also from another professor from St. Cloud State, I think. And so, and it worked. It is truth. It is truth. And so, I mean, that is the another additional question that I want a proof from you. And well, we didn't prepare for this question, but thank you again. And so thank you.
You're welcome.
Yep. And so last professional question is when you serving international clients, well, you cover some of. Are there any cultural observations?
Um, no, not beyond what I've already mentioned. I have worked in, as you know, a lot of countries with lots of people at both corporate settings, government settings, and in public education settings, and healthcare, universities, pretty much all different levels of different types of environments. And it's not so much a culture as it is just personalities of the individuals you interact with. And instructional designers have to have the skill to deal with those different personalities domestically. So transferring them to international is not such a big deal.
Right, right. Next question is, how do you predict? Well, we're still in the middle of the pandemic, and I know that Minnesota is. I just called one of my professors in Minnesota, and he said we got a few thousands of infections a day,
Yeah.
and there are some number of deaths, and very unfortunate. So it's still in the high peak, and the numbers still, and the trend is still breaking daily records so far. So how do you think how to predict the pandemic will impact our field?
Well, first, I want to just compliment your country on how well you managed the pandemic. Our country has no management efforts at all. It's been dispersed rather poorly to lots of different states and agencies, and no central solution. But to your question, the pandemic has changed the way we do things. As we've talked, a lot more is being done through online technologies, not necessarily for education and training always, but just communication. People are working from home. They're not gathering for meetings, that sort of thing. So that has created the opportunity for instructional design to be applied to training as an online training solution in the environments that can support and afford that kind of solution. The pandemic has also changed our education. Here in the United States, most universities are not fully open. They don't have students back on campus for classes. So the training is taking place remotely. And as I said earlier, some education and training can happen online, and others require other environments. And I think for instructional design, a lot of learning comes from creating products as part of your classes, education and training products, that are then delivered to your fellow students as a way to get them critiqued and evaluated and to get you feedback. I don't think that's happening as well. I can't imagine it happening as well online as it would in a face-to-face environment. So there may be some preparation of instructional designers, that there may be some suffering happening there. But hopefully this pandemic will only last another year at the most. People will get vaccinated, and we'll be back to normal maybe next fall even, when our school starts in September. But long term, I think maybe the greatest outcome from this that will influence instructional design and training is some tools have been developed and refined for like Zoom, for communicating with people around the world, communicating in large numbers, delivering on different kinds of platforms, I've got a colleague in the country of Georgia that I communicate using a tool called Viber. That's an online solution that I hadn't run into until very recently. And so I think there are new tools coming out that are designed to facilitate communications. But I don't know that there will be long-term lasting effects other than that, perhaps.
Great, thank you. And I think does, but from my point of view, it is kind of a factor that escalates the development of e-learning for somehow. Since sometimes, the Chinese word for crisis is composed of two. One is the danger, the other is opportunity. The pandemic creates some opportunity for e-learning, probably. It's
Yes.
more people adopt it, and then last
Sorry,
two
I just
questions.
got distracted. There's a big buck deer walking through my yard right now with its antlers and everything.
Really?
My dog just saw it and barked. Yeah, it's a nice looking deer. It's a risky time for that deer to be out because it's hunting season right now.
Right. Do you put out a bag of salt and for them to lick? And
No, they just walk through the yard all the time.
Yeah, they're just
I
on
live
their own.
live next to a conservancy, a big preserve, so they're roaming in and off of that property all the time.
Beautifully.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Sorry about that.
No. Yeah, if you can give us some shots, that'd be great. I'll let our viewers.
It's in the woods now.
Yeah. I mean, later you can send us some pictures, and that'd be great. Anyway, if you had a chance to start all over again, what would you have done differently?
Well, you sent me some questions to think about, and that was one of them. And I have thought a lot about that. And, I don't know if young people are capable of doing this. I wasn't. But when I was young, I was interested in education, and I was interested eventually in how education was created, and instructional design came along, and so forth. I think if I had been a little more aggressive about thinking about my career early on, I mean, I've been extremely fortunate. I have had every opportunity come my direction that I could have ever hoped for, but I waited for those opportunities to come to me. If I was looking at this as a new, young, aggressive individual, I would think about, where do I want to be when I'm 40 or 50 or 60 or 70? Do I want to be an education leader in the profession, maybe at a university? Do I want to be a government official influencing how training is done in manufacturing environments? Do I want to run my own company and be an executive, or be an executive in my own company? Do I want to head a program in a corporation, a large firm, be in charge of their enterprise training systems? I never really thought about those things when I was younger. I kind of fell into those opportunities because I was in a field that was very popular at the right time for me. But coming into the field now, I would think long range. I would make a plan, and then I would do what I needed to do to get there. For example, do you need to have visibility in professional organizations? Do you need to publish? Do you need to publish refereed journals, research kinds of things? Do you need to publish articles in popular press, in online news feeds? Do you need to establish your credibility through other methods? Training, doing online or television delivery training, or online training? Do you need to have your own channels on YouTube, or a similar sort of system for making yourself visible? But to me, once you've got the basics of instructional design, and lacking a certification program, if you feel like you are a competent instructional designer, then I think you need to figure out how you want to, as a professional, apply that expertise, that competency, and which field and in which level. And then you need to figure out the steps to get there. It's kind of a instructional design process. You need to figure out your goals, your objectives, and then the assessment methods. How can you assess whether you're achieving those objectives that will get you to the goal that you want to reach? And as I said, I didn't do that, but now that I'm older and wiser, I wish I had.
Well, thank you so much. You're giving the most valuable advice to the young people, to the professionals that in front of a camera, and they need such. So, to summarize, what your advice is: plan early, if I'm right.
Plan early and stay with the plan. Now things will
Stay with the
change,
plan.
and you need to. It's kind of like that support process in my e-learning model. You need to go back and do maintenance evaluations and say, is this plan still right? Do I need to make modifications to this plan? How do I need to modify it? And make adjustments along the way. But I'd have a plan and I'd stick with it unless there were reasons to change it.
Yeah, same thing. I always give young graduates, I always tell them, don't change your profession after you're 30. Before 30, you can still, or 28, 29, you can still explore things, but find the things that you love, or change one or two jobs or something. Find the thing that the profession that you have the passion or love to or interest to, and then just go for it. I mean, for the rest of your career, because if you change in the middle 40s and then you suddenly change your profession, and then all your resources, your network, oh gosh, your professional knowledge, it's hard to connect, because in Chinese there's it's between two professions, like separated by mountains. So they're very, very, very different. They're very different line of business.
If I can add to that, though, in my career, I was interested in education very early on, and I was a teacher for about 10 years. I was a university professor. I was a business owner. I worked in international development, consulting with all kinds of groups. And it felt in some ways like different careers, but the theme that ran through all of it was education. I was involved in designing and delivering education and training from the time I was 20 years old to now when I'm 68 years old. So, it's...
You don't like 68 at all. You're never 68 to me.
Well, thank you. Trust me, I feel like 68 when I get up in the morning. All my bones are creaking and aching. But anyway, the thing is, within your profession, you can have sort of different roles and activities that you can find enriching. And actually, in my case, I felt they extended my interest or expanded my interest in what I was doing, because I was now applying my instructional design expertise in different ways. I was training university students to be instructional designers. I was applying instructional design in different corporate settings. I was working with governments and international agencies on instructional design issues. So it was allowing me to take that core knowledge and apply it in ways that I found reinvigorating and engaging and rewarding.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very, very valuable, and that's treasure to the young. There's a Chinese saying, with an aged people, you always can learn some wit.
Yeah.
It's always like a treasure. An old person in a family always like a treasure to the family. So because it can tell all the family members what to do and what not to do, because they have been there, done that. Yeah. So Yeah. As a closing statement, Greg, do you have any advice to the young practitioners in China and developing countries as a whole?
Well, the field of education will always exist. You know, to do education and training in a corporate setting and higher education, wherever, there's always going to be a need to help people learn, to create quality materials to help people learn. And so I think it's, in some ways, it's a very secure profession to get into in terms of, not losing the opportunity for employment. And yet it's also something that you have to take very seriously and apply expertise, develop and apply expertise. One of the greatest weaknesses, I think, about the design and development of training, one of the huge disadvantages is a lot of people say, well, I was a student, I know how it works, so I can become a teacher. You know, I was a employee who sat in some training, I could be a trainer. I was a trainer, I can develop instructional materials. And that isn't the way it works. You know, you have to learn a lot of stuff. You have to have a strong foundation. You have to know the work of all the professionals that you, George, have interviewed in your program, your Training Masters series. And you need to know what those people did, what they learned, how their thinking changed over time. And you need to be able to, for yourself, establish a good, solid core of knowledge, and then use that and evolve it as your knowledge and skills evolve over time. Your experiences will influence that. So I think the main thing is, don't think this is easy to get into and easy to do if you want to be good at it. Instead, you've got to work hard, just as you do in any other profession, to become a leader in that profession, a skilled, competent person. And so I would encourage young people getting into the field to take it seriously, to work hard, to develop a core of knowledge that they believe is fundamental to their success, and to apply that and let their experiences help them to shape it and evolve it. But keep that core pretty tightly with you, right, through your career.
And to add to that, well, everybody I know of that engage in the learning development, corporate learning field end up very well. Either they retired very well, they got a very good life and very well, end up very well.
Yeah.
I don't know about other professions, but so
Well,
I think you're young.
I think it's important to realize this is a profession. It's not a job.
It is.
It's not like going and running the equipment in the factory all day and then going home. This is a profession, and it involves a professional commitment, you know, continuous learning, applying your knowledge and skills rigorously, defending the work that you do, having confidence in it. And so yeah, and as a profession, if you do it well, I agree with you, you will be rewarded. I certainly have had a wonderful career, continue to have a wonderful career, and I have a beautiful home and property and a secure future, and I attributed it all to the work I've done. So I can just keep from catching COVID.
In Buddhism, it says, well, in all the kind of religions, we give out and then we give out enough, and then we get something in return as well. So that's kind of a balance of life too. Yeah, it comes back to. So anyway, well, thank you so much. Thank you for everything, Greg. Thank you for your, well, we covered a lot of topics on ISD, on business, on how to serve clients and internationally, about ISD, about how to become a good instructional designer, and about the models at the very beginning, and how to conduct business analysis, and also on e-learning. We linger around e-learning a lot, the production cycles and the development teams and the values and the e-learning values to enterprises, and also in multiple cultural settings. So, and also finally, you gave us a lot of shrewd advice to the young practitioners. Thank you so much. Thank you
You're
so much,
very
Greg.
welcome. Thank you, George. It was great to be with you this morning, my time. Have a good evening, and I wish you all the best. So happy to talk to you.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye. That's my interview with Dr. Greg Sales. How do you feel? I feel so glad I had this opportunity to talk to him. He and I has been friends for nearly a quarter century now. And while I was school pursuing my master's degree in instructional system design and performance improvement, I also interned at his company. So I learned a lot. He's not only a very learned scholar, professor, he is also a very, very experienced practitioner. He designed numerous e-learning courses for many, many Fortune 500 companies across the globe in 45 countries, including government agencies. So he is very experienced. And also during our talk, we covered a wide range of topics, including the ISD definition, some basic definitions of ISD, and also the models, which was his most favorite model, and also the relation between learning and performance, and also most importantly, the very good old standing sound e-learning design and development model or cycle. During our talk, he also mentioned the book that I translated for him, the Quick Guide to E-Learning, published in 2002, and I translated into Chinese by CITIC publishing house in 2003 in China, before I came back to China. So he is really a very, very experienced, learned scholar and practitioner, and we wish him well. And also during our talk, we also mentioned micro-learning and micro courses. From his point of view, he did give us some definition and give us some advices that micro-learning should not only be disseminating information, but have to go through the encoding process into our brain from short-term memory to long-term memory. So thank you, Dr. Greg Sales. Thank you for your decades of dedication to this field. I have learned a lot from you personally, and we have learned a lot from you tonight. Thank you. We wish you well, and we wish you see you soon. Next week, we are going to have the very profound honor to have another very heavyweight figure in our field onto our show. Her name is Dr. Victoria Marsick. She's very well known in our field, and she's currently an HRD professor at Columbia University. She has been in this field for around 4 decades, and her area of research covers a wide range of topics such as informal learning, action learning, workplace learning, lifelong learning, organizational learning, learning organizations, incidental learning, DLOQ, which is about the dimensions of learning organization questionnaire, which is almost a standard for learning organizations. So next week will be a very heavy learning week, and very good learning opportunity for all of us, not only myself. And she's also in 2006, she was also inducted by the International Adult Continuation Education into their Hall of Fame. So she's also a Hall of Famer. So we're expecting next week to talk to Dr. Victoria Marsick. So until next week, please stay safe, stay tuned. Thank you, and good night.